Hi there, welcome to the Non-Visible Disabilities and Conditions session at the 4th International Conference. This session will be led by me, Isobel Robins, CAFE's Research Officer, and I'll also be joined by a few disabled fans sharing their experiences throughout the presentation. So this session is going to give you a bit of insight into the key findings and recommendations from the CAFE Non-Visible Disabilities and Conditions research project that we carried out last year. And as you'll see from the research findings, one of the key findings was that accessible services are used by the majority of non-visibly disabled fans, but that they face a lot of attitudinal barriers whilst doing so. So one of the things we're going to look at today is kind of how accessible services are used by non-visibly disabled fans and why they're used to kind of try and remove some of these attitudinal barriers. And then we're also going to hear from some autistic fans and a fan with OCD about their match day experiences. So who is non-visibly disabled or who has a non-visible condition? Well, it's actually the majority of disabled people, at least 70%, but people say up to about 90% of disabled people have a non-visible disability or condition. And this is non-visible disabilities or conditions are often not necessarily noticeable by others. And this can be because they're not physical or the person doesn't evidently use assistive technology or equipment. So a wheelchair user, for example, would be visibly disabled, whereas somebody with dementia or an autistic person is usually going to be non-visibly disabled. And actually, some people will be both visibly and non-visibly disabled. So you might have an autistic wheelchair user, and some people also go from being visibly disabled, maybe if they're using mobility equipment, to non-visibly disabled if they don't need it on that particular day. So to give you an idea of the kind of people we're talking about when we're saying non-visibly disabled people and people with long-term health conditions, this includes kind of these umbrella terms of intellectually disabled people and neurodivergent people. This group kind of have quite similar access requirements, usually related to communication barriers. So they might need alternative accessible formats provided, and they may also need services that support with sensory access requirements like sensory packs or sensory viewing rooms. This group also includes people that have dementia who might need to bring a companion or come for a familiarization tour in advance, or people that have epilepsy who may bring a medical alert dog, or again, they might need a companion to accompany them. We're going to hear a little bit about fans with mental health issues later from our fan with OCD. And this list is obviously not exhaustive. There's a lot of other non-visible disabilities and conditions. These include people that have a stoma, people with endometriosis, or people that have heart and breathing conditions, to name but a few. And the reason we kind of carried out our research project was that non-visibly disabled people are just as disabled as other disabled people by the environment around them, but there's a massive gap in the literature. Most of the accessibility considerations, requirements relate to visibly disabled people. So, for example, their recommendations on the number of wheelchair accessible toilets in a stadium are directly related to the number of wheelchair accessible spaces in the stadium. But we know that there are far more people that require wheelchair accessible toilets than just wheelchair users. So that is a figure that needs to be readdressed and kind of more toilets provided in that case. So the research project first started by consulting with a working group of experts who had expertise in kind of all of those umbrella groups that I listed on the previous slide. And then we used the information and the guidance that we got from them to create a survey for fans across Europe that we gathered data on last year. And then towards the end of last year, we published a few reports which highlighted the key barriers faced by these groups and then the recommendations that we would make to help alleviate these barriers. And these were published in a sort of longer form, which is aimed at clubs and national associations, and then a shorter form for fans and for participants. And we also provided this in easy to read as well to make it accessible to everyone. So if we move on to some of the key survey findings, and as I already said, one of the major barriers faced by non-visibly disabled people are attitudinal barriers. And around 72% of the participants in the survey had their eligibility to use accessible services questioned, which is quite a shocking figure. And this could have come from other supporters, come from stewards, stadium staff, and sometimes it also has come from other disabled people that might not know the reasons why people require an accessible service, such as a wheelchair accessible toilet, when they're not a wheelchair user. And some of the reasons why people need accessible services. So it might be people might need things like easy access seating, not because they need minimal stepped access, but because they need to be in close proximity to accessible concessions because they can't stand for long, or closer to accessible toilets because they require it to change medical equipment. Unfortunately, about 2 in 5 of the participants felt really uncomfortable when they actually did use accessible services, based on the kind of looks they got from other people, being worried about harassment from others, and kind of this, even just going to use a service was accompanied by this sense of kind of fear that there was going to be a negative reaction. So it's really, really key that non-visibly disabled fans are empowered to use the services that they're entitled to. And we really need to kind of recommend and ensure that education is given to other fans, but also stadium staff and stewards, who are quite often the people calling people out, perhaps incorrectly, for using accessible services. And that has to go along with this principle of not every disability is visible, or not all disabilities are visible. And kind of at the bare minimum, this can be done by adding inclusive signage. So, for example, in the picture on the slide, this is an image from accessible toilets at Wembley Stadium, and it says not every disability is visible, and then says accessible toilet, and then to kind of show that they're kind of open to anybody that might require it. They've got the sort of male toilet symbol, female toilet symbol, and then the international symbol for access as well beneath it. So it was really clear from the research, and as I've already said, a large proportion of non-visibly disabled people do benefit from access to wheelchair accessible toilets. In fact, over half of the people in the survey would use a wheelchair accessible toilet, but only about 9% of people in the survey indicated that they were wheelchair users. Unfortunately, though, about 40% of participants had experienced barriers when using them, and that included things like the facilities being unclean, misuse by non-disabled spectators causing longer queuing times. Sometimes they're locked with Euro or radar keys, which means they're not able to be accessed by people that don't have a key. And sort of the main barrier was really this being incorrectly challenged for using accessible toilets. So I wanted to kind of show you why people need these toilets that aren't wheelchair users. So for some people, they really benefit from the kind of increased space, especially if you need support from a companion when you're using the toilet, or if you need to bring your guide and assistance dog into the space with you. Other people benefit from the shortened queuing times because they might find it painful to stand for long periods of time, or some autistic people really struggle in crowds and queuing, and it leads to a build-up in anxiety. And some people also need quicker access to a toilet because they're on medications or they have conditions that mean they need to use the toilet very quickly. In addition to that, the features of wheelchair accessible toilets can make them accessible to non-visibly disabled people, especially people that might need to change medical equipment. So people with a stoma, for example, will need to make use of the shelves and the hooks to store their equipment whilst they're changing. They also need the contained sink to clean their hands and clean around their stoma. And then they would also need access to the bin to dispose of their old stoma bag. As a result of the attitudinal barriers faced, a lot of the participants said that they would be really willing to use an identification system at football matches if they were available, and actually already about nearly 40% of people had used one before. And an identification system is a way to signify to others that you have a non-visible disability or condition. And usually at football matches, this would be to signify to stewards or security staff, so that to kind of indicate that you might need a little bit of extra support or extra time, or that you require access to accessible services like a lift or perhaps a wheelchair accessible toilet. And these identification systems really range and depends on what's most suitable for the fans at your club to what you should perhaps think about introducing. So for example, in the image on the right, we've got two people from Bradford City Football Club in the UK, and they are using a lanyard system at their club, which uses the kind of UK-wide recognised inside and outside of football sunflower symbol on a lanyard, which also has their Bradford City logo on as well. And the reason that people want these is to just make their disability visible and to stop these embarrassing, intrusive questions that you often face when using services as a non-visibly disabled person. And whilst these are amazing for people, they're also not going to be suitable for everyone, and they can't replace staff training on disability access and awareness. So they should only really be introduced in consultation with your club. And I really want to stress that if they are introduced, people that choose not to wear them should also be afforded the same privileges and respect from your staff that people wearing them would be given. We're now going to hear from some non-visibly disabled fans about their matchday experiences, including the barriers that they face and some of the services that they use to remove these barriers, and how this kind of relates to some of the other findings from our surveys. So a couple of weeks ago, I sat down with a family of Arminia Bielefeld supporters to hear about their autistic son's experiences attending matches. So on the left of the video, we've got their brother Niels, who is going to translate because the brothers don't speak English. And then we're hearing about the experiences of Paul and Yanis. Paul's not on camera and Yanis is sitting in the middle, and then their mum is also joining us on the right-hand side.
So he said for him, the noises, the headaches, and many attractions in the stadium is something he can't comprehend really good. And the problem for him was he couldn't watch a full game in the stadium without nearly breaking down because of the overstimulation. Keepers and all the voices distracting him. So he can't process all the impressions he experienced in the game. And because of that, he has to go to the game very early to avoid all the people, to get his 2 seats very early. We're using the accessible security queues to get in the stadium, which is a big relief for my brothers. And you don't have to wait, you don't have to go into the mass of the people. And it's fast, so you don't have to wait long. You can go in the stadium and go see what you want to see, not the people, not the voices. And it isn't so loud. We have the snooze room, I think it's called, where you can't see the field, can't see the pitch. You don't hear voices. It's a real quiet room with a sofa, and you can chill there if you are overstimulated. And that's a big relief, because you can't watch a fully 90-minute game as a autist, I think, because your brain is simply overstimulated. You can't process all the data you are getting. And this new room is a big relief. And outside the match day in the stadium, we are highly frequently using the easy speech, or so-called einfache Sprache, on the Arminia website, which is helping autistic and disabled people to understand what we need for a match day, or in general important informations. Basically the whole website, but in easy speech. So, you know, club has a website with all the information for, I don't know, you want to buy tickets, how are the hygiene restrictions for stadium, and in the section with easy speech, it's easy without any unnecessary information. You just have the information you need, and that's all.
So as we heard in the video, Paul and Yanis face a lot of sensory barriers that can make the match day overwhelming and hard to process. And one of the ways that they try to overcome this is by arriving at the stadium early and by using accessible security queues. And these are a real advantage for them because they're quicker, they're quieter to pass through, and they're manned by staff trained in disability awareness. So this enables them to enter the stadium early and avoid the queues and the crowding that cause them problems. This was something we found a preference for in the survey as well, with about 2/3 of fans saying that they would use an accessible security queue. And for some people, like Yanis and Paul, this was to help avoid these queues and crowding. But for others, it was because they'd had some really negative experiences going through general access or standard security queues. And with about 3 in 5 of them facing barriers going through the security process. This could be because being touched by strangers and being manhandled insensitively can cause a lot of anxiety for certain people, or it can trigger painful spasms in people that have chronic pain. And so people wanted to use these accessible security queues because they thought the security would be more sensitive and understanding of people and their individual needs, and would be trained to recognize things like medical devices. So if someone with diabetes has a continuous glucose monitor, to understand what that is and to search around it sensitively. And the same if somebody was to have to be using a stoma bag, for example. We also heard from Yanis and Paul about one of the key features that enables them to attend games, which is the sensory viewing room available at Armenia. And it's the only one currently installed at a club in Germany. So they're really lucky to be able to have access to this. And it's amazing that they're able to attend games at their stadium, but it does mean that they can't really attend games at other stadiums because there aren't sensory viewing rooms everywhere. The way that the sensory viewing room works is it kind of removes all of the external sensory stimuli from the stadium bowl by enabling people to watch the game from within a controlled sensory environment. So at Bielefeld, they've converted a previous hospitality box into the sensory viewing room area where supporters can watch the game in the controlled and managed sensory environment. And then sort of to the side of this, they've got a separate kind of room that's attached, and in there they can get sensory stimulation if they need it. So this could be from things like light up bubble tubes. They've got bean bags in there. It's basically a space where people can manage their kind of sensory access requirements. And the best thing is that this experience can be adapted to those who are using the room. So some people might really need overstimulation, whereas others might want this to be a really quiet, calming space. And it's important that before you're installing one of these rooms to consult your fans on what's going to be suitable for them. It might be that all the fans currently at your stadium have a preference for a certain type of equipment, and so obviously it would be great to get that installed. Yanis and Paul also mentioned that advance information was really essential for them to be able to attend matches. And this was a big topic in the survey too, with about 66% of participants saying that they would use an advance information guide before visiting a stadium. And it's vital for many people because it helps them to purchase tickets that are suitable for their needs. A lot of non-visibly disabled people won't buy accessibility tickets, but will need to buy tickets that are in close proximity to accessible services. So having good advanced information about the stadium structure and layout and the location of accessible services is essential. And it also helps people to plan their match day journey and routine. If people have a bit of anxiety or uncertainty about the match day, then advanced information can be used to plan out the routine and anticipate any potential barriers, meaning that people can put strategies in place before they attend to help them overcome these barriers. So, for example, in the survey, one parent to an autistic teenager said that their son needed to know as much information as possible beforehand to help him process and therefore be able to enjoy the day. And somebody else said that they and their family benefited from having good information about what was near their seating area, so that if something went wrong during the match, they would be able to kind of adopt this fight or flight plan and work out how they were going to overcome that barrier. Therefore, it's really important that this information is provided to all ticket holders in advance, including non-accessibility ticket holders, as so many non-visibly disabled people will be using non-accessibility tickets. And this should include things about how to get to the stadium, what accessible transport there is, where accessible services and facilities are, how they can be accessed, whether there's anything like an identification system in place, and what kind of services are available for disabled spectators. So whether there's audio descriptive commentary or a sensory viewing room, and how you can access this. And as Yanis and Paul mentioned, it's really important that this is provided in alternative formats, such as easy to read, which in the survey was actually preferred by about a third of respondents. And easy to read is it's a way to communicate information to autistic or intellectually disabled people, or people with whose first language isn't the native language of your country, because it uses plain language and images to make information accessible. And Yanis and Paul were using this information on their club's website to help them find out information about ticketing and kind of where they needed to go if they were going to a certain seating area in the stadium. And there's actually some really good practice at the minute in Germany on this, with quite a few clubs providing their websites in easy to read, or providing their club newsletter in easy to read. And you can see on the right hand side, the DFL have got a sort of centralized website where easy to read advanced information can be accessed about clubs in quite a few of the German leagues. We're now going to hear from Fakra, who is an Irish football fan who has OCD. He's a Dundalk supporter, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his experiences attending home and away games over the last 10 years and the kind of barriers that he faces with OCD.
I always have to get there at least an hour before kickoff. I can't not be there an hour before kickoff. Mm-hmm. And I get really bad anxiety if I'm half an hour before kickoff. I just can't deal with it. And it's the same. I know everyone likes a lot of people wear the jerseys and all that, but I have to be in the latest jersey, latest tracksuit bottoms, the latest jumper. To an extent, one time I even wore one that was just out of the wash. It was still dripping wet. Even if I have to set one over, I can't deal with it. So it's 73 and I'm always in it. And if I have to set one to the left or the right, I can't enjoy the game. It could be a cup final, and I can't be dealing with them. I start scratching at my fingers and things like that. I know the staff in Oriel Park now, where Dundalk play, they know me from coming in. So there's sometimes I'm there a wee bit too early, or they're maybe running a wee bit late, and the gates aren't even open, and they let me in. So they know me to see. So that's always a good help. But it's hard. And sometimes the club will put up that their tickets are on sale at 10 o'clock in the morning, say.
Yeah.
And then I'm there from 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock, queuing and waiting, and then the office mightn't open it all until 11 o'clock.
Right.
And I've gotten anxious, maybe they've sold out online, something silly like that, I'm thinking, and so they're not even going to bother opening the shop. And so it's just things like that. The club, I think, need to, if they say they're opening at 10, they have to open. It does make me nervous, if I'm going somewhere new, not knowing things, but I tend not to reach out, because I'm always kind of worried that people are going to say something not take me seriously or something like that, because that don't really look like I've anything wrong with me whenever when you first see me coming, but then underneath I'm freaking out about certain stuff.
So at the end there, Fakra spoke about finding it challenging when clubs change plans at the last minute, and in the video he used the example of the ticketing office saying that it would open at a certain time but then opening later with no warning, which caused him a lot of anxiety. and stress. And this is something that happens that affects quite a lot of people with mental health issues, and neurodivergent people struggle with last minute changes to schedules. And this can cause things like meltdowns in autistic people and increased anxiety in others. And off camera, Faker also spoke about finding it difficult when the away end at another club moved, so that he would be sitting in a different area when he was going to watch his team play there. And this happened quite unexpectedly, and he basically said that this caused him a lot of anxiety because his seat had moved without any warning, and it took him a long time to feel comfortable with sitting in that area. And I kind of wanted to raise this because these last minute changes, which might or changes to the match day routine, which might seem quite minor to clubs and national associations, actually can have quite a large effect on neurodivergent people with mental health issues, and other non-visibly disabled people. So any changes like this that are happening need to be communicated as quickly and in as many ways as possible in order to reach fans and enable them to rejig their plans or readjust their mindset going into a day that's going to be slightly changed. And it was clear from the video that a lot of the barriers Faker faces when his match day routine is disrupted. For example, if someone sits in the seat that he likes to sit in, or is late, or if he isn't at the game an hour early, it causes him a great deal of anxiety. And like Yanis and Paul, he really benefits from arriving early, and he doesn't use accessible security services, but he does need a bit of flexibility from the club. And it was really promising to hear that they will let him in early if the gates aren't open, in order for him to be able to get into his seat and to reduce his anxiety levels. And I really want to promote this kind of flexible, person-centered stewarding, because it can have such a large impact with very little effort on behalf of clubs or individuals. So, for example, there was a really great example in the media a couple of weeks ago from Arsenal in England, where a autistic boy went to his first kind of big football match with his dad, and they were sitting in the main stadium bowl, and he became quite overwhelmed with the sensory environment. So they decided to leave after about 20 minutes, and a steward noticed they were leaving, approached them, asked them why, realised that they were leaving due to the sensory environment, and identified that they might benefit from the sensory viewing room. So then she took them to the sensory viewing room and enabled them to be able to watch the rest of the match from that space, meaning they could watch the entire game when before they were just going to be leaving after 20 minutes. And that really highlights the importance of having well-trained stewards that know about non-visible disabilities, but also about the services that are available to disabled fans across the stadium. And it's important that these people, that everyone in the stadium is trained on this, even if they're not working in accessible areas. Faker also spoke about how he doesn't feel able to ask for support at other stadiums or for information about away days, because he doesn't think that he'll be taken seriously due to having a non-visible condition. And unfortunately, this is quite common among non-visibly disabled people. And many disabled people in the survey didn't know that they were eligible to access accessible services such as easy access seating or access to lifts in bigger stadiums. And they didn't know that clubs should be making reasonable adjustments for them. So it's really imperative that clubs demonstrate that they are welcome to non-visibly disabled people and people with long-term health conditions, and that they make it clear that they will provide access requirements and make adjustments to those people that are eligible. And one way that clubs can do this is by making it really explicit that accessibility tickets can be purchased by anybody that has an access requirement, including non-visibly disabled people. So you could put on your ticketing pages, for example, perhaps use a couple of the umbrella terms from my slides right at the start to say who might be eligible, and to say that you're very welcome to have conversations with people about their individual access requirements as well. And also publishing this advanced information and publishing specific information about services for non-visibly disabled spectators can make people realise that you are providing these services. They should be celebrated. Things like sensory viewing rooms or dementia memory groups should be celebrated and promoted by the club across the website, in club media, and as well as any work with the Disabled Supporters Associations that has supported non-visibly disabled fans and spectators. These kind of changes, giving this visibility to the services that you provide and the fact that you're willing to make or to meet people's access requirements that are non-visibly disabled and have long-term health conditions, will encourage and make non-visibly disabled spectators confident to come to matches at your stadium. So that brings our session for today to a close, and I just wanted to finish by saying thank you so much for attending, and a massive thank you to Faker, Yanis, Paul and their families for taking part in the Matchday Experience interviews. It's Isabelle from the video. I'll just describe myself quickly. So I'm a white woman with blondie brown hair in my mid-20s. And yeah, as I said at the start of the last video, I'm from Cafe and I'm the research officer. Sadly, Faker, Yanis and Paul couldn't join today for the Q&A, but I'm here. So if anyone has any questions about the research project, anything to do with the barriers faced by non-visibly disabled fans, or kind of implementing some of the strategies to overcome these barriers, then please pop some questions in the chat. I can see there's a couple of questions already. Oh, and I just wanted also to say, if you want to get a copy of the video that you just watched, that will be shared around in the resources at the end of the conference. So first question, please can you share a bit more about the lanyard system and how you know people using it are actually disabled? Yeah, of course. So the lanyard system is kind of a voluntary opt-in system for people at your club, and it's a way for people to communicate that they are non-visibly disabled or that they have a non-visible condition. And the way that it works is that clubs usually either produce their own, or they'll use a kind of common identification system like the sunflower lanyard, and people can come to the club or request them to get posted out to them, and then they can wear it on match days to kind of signify to staff and stewards and maybe to other fans attending that they might need a bit of extra time when answering the question, or they might benefit from being told where accessible services are. And in terms of how you know that the people that are using it are actually disabled, so it shouldn't be used in a kind of replacement for checking proof of disability for things like an accessibility ticket. So it shouldn't really matter if people that are wearing it aren't disabled, because all it is just kind of making it a more welcoming environment and encouraging stewards to offer that additional support if required. And because people are coming to the club and requesting it from you, it's very, very unlikely that it will be somebody that's not disabled that's using it. And then another question. So there's not, yeah, someone's saying, you know, there's not enough wheelchair accessible toilets in most stadiums anyway. So how can we kind of meet this demand? And I would say, yeah, that's a massive issue. There's already not enough toilets, and you know, more and more people require wheelchair accessible toilets that aren't wheelchair users. So one of the things I would suggest is to try and make your other toilets in the stadium more accessible, because there's certain people won't be using a wheelchair accessible toilet for the size or for the drop down barriers. People will be using them because they need to dispose of medical equipment. So if you put bins across all of the rest of your toilets, the people that use wheelchair accessible toilets to dispose of adult pads or stoma bags will be able to use these other toilets. In addition to that, things like installing hooks and shelves in, maybe if you've got slightly larger standard access toilets, that will also help people that need this to change equipment. And then kind of in my own experience in a previous role, I used to be a support worker for a man that was intellectually disabled, and it was a kind of a safeguarding issue to allow him to go into like a male general access toilet, and obviously I couldn't go with him. So if clubs are able to provide universal toilets, not only is this more accessible for trans and non-binary people, but also people that have to have a companion accompany them. And then, any more questions? Oh, and what kind of access information is helpful to non-visibly disabled people? So the same access information that's helpful to all disabled people, so information about how to get to the stadium, what accessible services are available, where they can access things like sensory packs, but also it's really important to offer more kind of detailed access information, I'd say, in advance. So a lot of people in the survey said that they didn't actually need sort of wheelchair accessible or easy access seating, but they did need seating that was close to other accessible services. So providing a lot of information about the different seats or stands in the stadium enables people to buy tickets that are suitable to them. So somebody in the survey gave the example that they needed to be close to the toilet because they needed to be closer to an accessible toilet, but they wanted to be high up because they didn't like having people behind them in the stadium. So they would have to do a lot of research before going to a new ground to be able to find a seat that was high enough in the stands to make them feel comfortable, but not too far away from wheelchair accessible toilets. And okay, one more question, I think. So how important is it for clubs to provide training to their matchday stewards to be aware of fans with non-visible disabilities? Yeah, that's really, really imperative. It's so important that stewards and stadium staff are trained to recognise non-visibly disabled people and to offer the same support to them as they would to other disabled people. So in the presentation, we heard a really good example of that happening at Arsenal, where the steward was trained on the accessible services they had on offer so that they could enable that fan to go and use the sensory viewing room. So yeah, it's just really important that your disability inclusion and etiquette training does include non-visibly disabled people. And one of the ways that you can make your training more tailored to the people at your stadium is to maybe invite non-visibly disabled fans to come and talk about their experiences at the stadium, what's working for them, where they've had good practice with stewards, and what kind of things stewards could do to actually improve their experience, so that you're tailoring your stewards' matchday experience to the people that are actually coming to your stadium. Okay, brilliant. I think that's it from me. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. If you want to join, there's a group discussion on kind of services for non-visibly disabled fans later, kicking off at about 5:20. And then the next session of the conference is about technology and innovation and how to increase engagement with disabled fans.